Let them praises give Jehovah. They were made at his command. Them forever he established. His decree shall ever stand. From the earth, oh, praise Jehovah. All ye floods, ye dragons all. Fire and hail and snow and vapor, stormy winds that hear him call. Let them praises give Jehovah, for his name alone is high. And his glory is exalted. And his glory is exalted. And his glory is exalted, far above the earth and sky.
Something that was considered right. If Satan can influence the way we think, our battle is lost. Can you think of examples of that you've seen in your life? Steve's shaking his head.
Just turn on the television, and you're just flooded with all of these things that anybody ought to understand that this is the right thing to believe and do, and you know, boys or girls, and you know, all of these things, and we're just getting inundated by this to the point that people think they can't. Maybe I've been wrong on these.
You know, our young people, in particular, are vulnerable to this because they have less experience. They have less experience dealing with what's true and what's not true. And frankly, they've been taught that a lot of things that were held to be true for years are really false. And so, if you look at any of the recent surveys of what are the beliefs of Gen Z, we're basically up to about age 26 and below. It is an eye-opener because there are a lot of ideas that are accepted as being true that really have no basis in reality. And the further we get away from truth, the further we get away from reality. Reality becomes what we make it to believe or what we believe it to be rather than what is. Oh,
it all stems back to there is no absolute truth.
Absolutely. If there's no absolute truth, then what is there to guide you?
Well, there's my truth, and your truth, and somebody else's truth.
What if my truth is opposite your truth?
Well, it doesn't matter because I'm going to do what's right for me, and you can do what's right for you, and everybody else can do what's right for them. And so we've got...
There used to be an experiment in physics that they would do to kind of illustrate. They were illustrating laws of motion, but it applies here. There's free moving ball bearings on a table. They use an air table where they try to reduce friction and everything as much, and all of these balls moving around at random. What happens? They keep colliding. And because they keep colliding over time, what happens is a pattern. And the imperfections in the air table that you didn't know about become apparent because now there are lines and so forth where chaos always finds resolution in order. Why is that? God above everything else. God is the God of order and truth. I mean, everything else stems from that. all of His character, all of His understanding, all of what is true in the principles of science or the whatever, stems from the fact that God is the God of order and truth. If I can deviate just a little bit into one of my pet, I wish I knew more about it, fields. All knowledge originates with God and is God's truth. And it doesn't matter what field you're talking about. If you're talking about medicine, we discover something in medicine that we think is new because God let us discover it. We design ships that go in the air and find different things on different planets. Guess who knew it was there from the beginning? And so it begins with understanding the truth, and what an advantage it is today to have the basic truth of the world so readily available. It wasn't that way for these Roman Asians in the first century. A full 50% of them could not read and write. Therefore, to understand the truth, they were dependent on hearing it. And so you had to be very careful who you listened to if you wanted to know the truth. Okay. What's next? If you read the rest of verse 14, getting into verse 15. Having put on the breastplate of righteousness. Knowledge of God's truth always leads to what? Leads to right actions, righteousness. If you know what's right, you're far more likely to do it. Because you not only know what's right, you know why it's right. And that leads to the reason of doing it. We were made righteous. Now we need to realize this is two things going on here. Because by ourselves as human beings, where do we stand in terms of righteousness? We're not righteous. We can't be righteous. We've tried it. No matter what, we try it and we fail. We try it and we fail. Who makes us righteous? The blood of Christ. Christ's sacrifice not only forgives the sins that we've committed, but it does what? Try 1 John chapter 5, verse 2. It continues to cleanse us. It does something to our hearts, our minds, our ways of looking at things that makes us, if we allow it, to want to do what's right. If you want to do what's right, what? You're more likely to do it. Yes.
Attorneys thought, well, that can't be. There's got to be an ability to question. So, like I say, I think it would be difficult to be an attorney to Christian.
That's one of the things I've often thought. But there are a lot of things that in reality are uncontestable. Life and death. Human or non-human. And yet all of these are things that are routinely contested. When does a person die? When is it absolutely certain they're dead? Well, millions are made arguing that back and forth because inheritance gets involved and money gets involved. So you didn't die until later, and so we get laws, Pharisaical type laws on our books, trying to build a hedge around that. That if somebody's going to inherit for somebody else, they have to survive by at least 36 hours or something of that nature, which is true in some states. I don't think it is in Texas, but never contested it. But know the truth and then follow it and act rightly. Now, what's next? We go into verse 15 and moving on into 16. If we know the truth and if we're following the truth and acting rightly, what do we need next? All right. Put on, or having shod. And that word shod is very important. In Greek, the word that's used there, it means to bind under. In other words, that which limits us, that which is limiting around us. Having prepared is a word that's one way it's translated in many translations. Having prepared your feet with the gospel of peace. So when we were reconciled to God, when was that?
The resurrection of Christ.
No, not for you or me. We weren't alive then. When did we encounter the resurrection of Christ? Okay. At that point, we were reconciled to God. What else took place at that same point in time?
The Holy Spirit
indwells us, but what else? In terms of being reconciled, we were not only reconciled to God, but who else were we reconciled to? How about Pam? Or Brian, or me, or so. We were reconciled to each other. And this is something that was really about to tear the church apart in those days. It is today too. Because we're not reconciled with people that don't see the things the same way we do. But to be prepared, to be bound under with the preparation of the gospel of peace has something to do with how we treat people, with how we regard people. I can know the truth, and I can act rightly, and still be what? We see it all the time in folks. Arrogant and disregarding to people who are not prepared with the gospel. All right, here then there.
Well, that's again a powerful question because a lot of different answers come from there. I know for serving Christ, they're serving their own purpose and what they can build from their foundation, not what God's foundation should be built on.
Okay. Now notice, Paul knows all that. He's lived with it all his life. He saw all of the sectarian splits and tears that could result. So what is he saying to these Christians here in Ephesus? First, know the truth. Then do the truth. Then be peaceful. How did Paul say it in Romans? At the end of Romans, he's trying to say, in as far as it is dependent on you, live in peace with all men. So that means my agenda goes out the window. No matter what agenda I might have, and I think the human condition is such, it's hard for us to get rid of an agenda. But it should go out the window because in God's mind, that's just rubbish. Just sewage to be gotten rid of. Because the only agenda that counts is God's agenda. All right, Bill? Yeah, that was 1957. Interesting because that inscription is on the main library building, also known as the Tower. It's put there. That whole building was designed by a guy named Dr. Battle. He's one of the most renowned atheists ever to live. He was a philosophy professor until he just got so bad they put him in charge of the construction on the UT campus. Made him an administrator and put him in charge of campus. And so he built his own edifice. And if you'll notice, he was a specialist in classical literature, really Greek literature. Right on top of the tower is a little Greek temple up there. The observation deck is all set up as a Greek temple. Dr. Battle, he was quite a character in the early 40s, late 30s, and early 40s. Well, who did Pharaoh serve?
God. See, God rose up Pharaoh to show his power.
But Pharaoh was convinced he was following Ra or any of the other Egyptian gods. But God used even atheists to accomplish His will. And believe me, there's a lot of truth in that library building. You got to have a strong stomach to get it out of there, because that library is like being in prison. But it's God's agenda will always prevail, because God is the one who has the ultimate power. Pharaoh's agenda didn't prevail. Caesar's agenda didn't prevail. And neither will ours, and neither will the petty agendas of all of those who are trying to use religion for political gain, for wealth, for power in whatever way. In the end, God will prevail. Bill, one quick question, then we're going to move on.
Situation, if that's the case, that is Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians served God because he punished the children of Israel because of their wickedness. Well, after Nebuchadnezzar, then the Medes and the Persians took over the Babylonians, and they allowed or even helped the children of Israel get back to Jerusalem and build the temple.
Mm-hmm. And that God controlled that and used the emperor of the Persian Empire, Cyrus, to issue the decree that Jeremiah foresaw and wrote about 70 years before Cyrus was born. Even called him by name. Isaiah wrote about him and called him by name and said that he would be God's his arm, his servant, who would accomplish what his will was in returning the children of Israel to the promised land. Because they had to be there and they had to survive for another 400 years in order that the lineage of Christ could be preserved. Okay. Gird with truth. Take up the breastplate of righteousness. Now, what are we going to have to do? If you set yourself up to follow truth and you're doing what's right, what are you going to attract? Fiery darts is the way. That was the worst thing that could happen in battle in the first century. The archers, the foot soldiers were the main battle. The archers were they had artillery because they had the catapults. But the archers were the ones they really feared, because they would fire these arrows, many of which had burning tips, and if they hit a soldier, he was out. What did they use to defend against that? They used the shield. What was really probably the heaviest piece of armor they had. It was normally made out of wood, because you could not lift that much metal. Made out of wood, about 30 inches by 48 inches, and covered with leather on the outside. And normally that leather was wetted down before going into battle. Then when any of you have seen the movie Gladiator? How many of you have seen it? All right. Remember the scene in the arena when the archers are attacking the gladiators, and most of those gladiators were former Roman soldiers. What did they do? Formed a circle and covered themselves from the ground all the way around to the other side of the circle on the ground. And what happened to all the darts, all the arrows that were being fired? They bounced off or were extinguished or didn't do the damage they were supposed to do. And so they totally rewrote the historical lesson that the guy was trying to present. All right. The shield of faith. Now, what is Paul using this to represent in our lives? What keeps us from succumbing to the attacks that Satan brings against us? We can know the truth, and we should. We have to know the truth before you can have the faith in God. But the thing that is going to carry you through the attack is faith. What is faith? Well, that's something we've debated for years, and we can quote Hebrews 11, 1 and 2, the evidence of things not seen and all of that. But what does it really amount to? What is faith?
Belief in God with shoes on. Feet, it's not only I believe it, but I act it out. It influences my life. It's not just a mental, yes, I believe there's a God. There's enough strength behind it that, yes, I believe it and I will do it.
Well, that is persistence. Sometimes they call it stubbornness. What is faith? Well, some people, that's fatalism. It's going to happen no matter what I do. That's a kind of faith. It's a faith in I don't have any power. All right.
It's a belief and a trust.
Let's emphasize that last word. It's trust. Faith is what drives you to act when you're certain that your actions are not going to amount to anything. It's what keeps you going into battle when you're certain you're going to get killed. Because most of the time you aren't. See, if most people who go into battle die, what happens? That side loses. And Paul is trying to convince these Christians they aren't going to die eternally from being Christian. We're getting close to time, aren't we? All right. 5 minutes. The shield is our faith, our certainty, our absolute conviction that what we believe is right, and that if we continue to act on what is right, we will come through. Now, the final piece of the armor is what? What hasn't been protected yet? Head. That was like the second most vulnerable area. If you'd hit the head, because it's easier, it sticks up there, it's kind of like a golf ball on a tee. It's ready to have a sword swung at it. So you had to have a helmet. It was a metal helmet. Any of you ride a motorcycle? Wear a helmet? How much does a motorcycle helmet weigh? They're heavy. They only weigh about 1 or 2 pounds. Not 2 pounds, 2.5 pounds. A Roman soldier's helmet probably weighed in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 pounds. He had to wear it because wearing it protected him from being injured. Well, that's it. Then he said, take the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. That's the only offensive weapon a Christian has, which is God's Word. It's what God said that settles every issue. No matter what else, that's it. And the rest of the book is taken up with the few verses where Paul tries to make them aware of what his circumstances are and who's going to explain it. to them. So we're going to draw a line. There's the stopping point. And I invite you to think about it, reason about it, meditate on it. Any other thoughts and questions to be expressed before we go across the way?
He mentions Tychicus.
Yes.
What other books did Tychicus transmit?
I don't know. I forgot off the top of my head. Philemon was one.
It seems like there was another, maybe Galatians.
No, Galatians was before. Tychicus was one of the co-workers that Paul had close to him, and there were many. We don't realize how well informed Paul kept himself by having all of this circle of co-workers that he used as messengers going to and from the various churches and carrying messages and bringing messages back to him, so that he stayed informed on the status of the church and the needs of the church, and carried on such an active time while he was under house arrest that he was writing 2/3 of the New Testament, or nearly 2/3 of the New Testament, and no telling how many other letters and books that are not preserved that he sent to the various churches to help them and stay faithful. You'll have to just take it out on Jim next week. That's it. We pumped this well dry.
Jesus is Lord, my Redeemer. How He loves me, how I love Him. He is risen, He is coming. Lord, come quickly. Hallelujah. What a friend we have in Jesus. All our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Hallelujah. Lord, come quickly. Hallelujah. I still have joy. I still have joy. After all the things we've been through, I still have joy. And I still have joy. I still have joy. After all the things we've been through, I still have joy. I still have peace. I still